Hello everyone, it's Wednesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. Two isolated world leaders meet for the first time in more than 4 years. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and Russian President Vladimir Putin met on Wednesday at the Vostochny Cosmodrome space rocket launch site in Russia's Far East region. All eyes were on the summit as it could lead to a potential arms deal, Pyongyang providing weapons for Moscow to use on the battlefields against Ukraine, and Moscow transferring technology Pyongyang needs. Just before the meeting, North Korea fired 2 SRBMs toward the East Sea, even in Kim's absence. How do experts see the Kim-Putin summit, and how would this change global geopolitics and affect tension on the Korean Peninsula? For more on this, we invite Professor Brian Myers from Dongseo University. Welcome, Professor Myers.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being with us. And we also have Professor Jong-un from Gangwon National University. Good to see you, Professor Jong.
Good to see you too.
Thank you for being with us. Now, first question to our Professor Chung. So, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and Russian President met each other at Russia's Space Launch Center on Wednesday afternoon. Touring the center ahead of the summit, what did you think of their visit to this very venue, and what was its significance?
Well, it seems that there is an intention to showcase the key issue, one of the key issues of two countries' cooperations internationally, which focusing on space and military cooperations. Although the result of the summit have not been announced yet, considering the newly built space base, which is geographically close to North Korea, and Russia's willingness to assist North Korea in satellite productions, I think this space base can be seen as a symbolic venue for future cooperation for two countries, which is indeed a South Korean U.S. Against the South Korea's and U.S. expectation.
Right, I see. Symbolic venue. Now, Professor Myers, this is not their first time to have a summit. They had the summit in April 2019, and at that time, it was very different. The Kremlin officially disclosed Kim's impending visit prior to his arrival, as did North Korean state media. But this time, the details of the summit were left undisclosed until the last minute. Why was this?
Well, those were very different circumstances back then, because although Kim Jong-un had just come off that very disappointing Hanoi summit with Donald Trump that February, he was still on pretty good terms with the White House. The Americans were still interested in talking to him. And although Vladimir Putin had been criticized for the invasion of Crimea in 2014, he was still on speaking terms with the US government. And in fact, at that time, Kim Jong-un asked Vladimir Putin to mediate for him with the Americans. Well, now, of course, the situation is very different because the US is fighting a proxy war against Russia, and Biden seems more hostile to Kim Jong-un than Trump was. So as a result, there's a lot more tension now, and that naturally makes both the Russians and the North Koreans more interested in security and secrecy than they were 4 years ago.
I see. Situation was very different at that time. Now, Professor Chung, such a summit comes as both need each other for many reasons. Now, could you give us some background on what kind of geopolitical reasons made them pursue strengthened ties?
Well, the space cooperation seems to be one of the regions but from Russia's side, I think it intends to consolidating two countries' weapon trade relationship, with Russia obtaining significant and diverse range of ammunitions that can be fired against Ukraine. So Putin is under the urgent need for securing weapons as Ukraine war enters its 18th month as of this September. Especially recently, Ukraine has begun to achieve significant progress through counteroffensive, gradually advancing on multiple fronts, which is seen as putting even more pressure on Putin at this moment. So I think this is the main reason Putin reached his hand to North Korea. Of course, North Korea might prefer to cooperate more than this, and more on space, and more on advanced military technology. But at this moment, they are just agreeing on this space technology, I think.
Right, I see. Well, staying on the space technology front, Professor Myers, while touring the rocket launch facility, Kim reportedly asked many detailed questions on space technology, and Putin indicated that he would help develop North Korea's satellite program. If technology gets transferred, would this be in violation of international sanctions, and how big of help would this be to Pyongyang?
Well, this would be a clear violation of UN resolutions, which the Russians voted for, which expressly forbid providing North Korea with any sort of technical training or assistance related to military technology. So it sure does look like Russia is now signaling a kind of readiness to flout the same resolutions that it voted for. And this would be a huge help to Pyongyang's aspirations. It would speed up things considerably because really no other potential source of expertise comes close to Russia when it comes to space technology. I mean, the Russians have literally been doing this longer than any other country on Earth. They were the first to put a satellite into orbit a long, long time ago.
Professor Myers, you said this is going to be a big help to North Korea, and North Korea is expected right now to launch another spy satellite in October. Now, do you believe it could be successful, or is it too soon to say that?
Yeah, I think it is too soon to say that. You know, the North hasn't been doing particularly well this year. And these things, there are so many variables, and it's such a high-tech endeavor that really I think it would be a little bit reckless to make predictions either way.
Right, I see. Now, Professor Chung, apart from transferring technology, regarding the closed-door meeting between Kim and Putin, Kremlin spokesperson said the two will not sign documents, but will have discussed sensitive areas, including military interaction. Now, what do you expect the cooperation to range from and to? And in what direction are the two countries further expected to elevate bilateral ties?
Well, as Professor Myers said, this meeting represents a counteraction to their isolation faced by both Russia and North Korea. And North Korea is leveraging Russia's desperation for assisting the war in Ukraine as a lever to secure North Korea's international attention and legitimacy, while Russia finds itself in a dire situation willing to provide that assistance to North Korea. So I believe it must have been very frustrating for Russian government to realize that North Korea is their only ally remained at this point. So as I said, what Russia really wants from North Korea is additional ammunition supply, and they are likely to demand rockets like tank shells and ammunition for countering Ukraine drone attack. And North Korea is likely to request technological transfer from Russia in advanced weapon areas, as I said, the satellite launch capability. But at the same time, North Korea is likely to want to increase the size of overseas labor forces, which can bring hard currency to North Korea. And at the same time, North Korea and Russia also wants some North Korean construction workers, even militaries, for the purpose of reconstruction, as well as using them as a kind of military forces.
More overseas workforce, I see. Oh, now, Professor Myers, the U.S., its allies and partners have been, of course, paying close attention to the possibility of North Korea providing weapons to Russia to assist the Ukrainian war. Now, how do you believe Kim and Putin summit would change the geopolitics regarding this war, and how the international community react to potential arms deal?
I think it depends on the extent of the weaponry that's supplied. I mean, it's one thing if a small number of North Korean weapons ends up in that war having gone through some kind of indirect, murky channels. But it's quite another if North Korea openly and directly supports the Russian effort with a significant supply of weaponry. You know, I know some people think Kim Jong-un has nothing to lose because he's completely ostracized anyway. But there's a powerful faction in America's foreign policy establishment, including key think tanks and media outlets, that has long favored a soft line towards North Korea in the hope of luring it away from China and Russia and into the American camp. Now, if Kim Jong-un does become a de facto ally of Russia in this war in Ukraine, as he seems to be saying that he wants to with these latest remarks about fighting imperialism, I think U.S. government and expert and media opinion could well turn monolithically hardline or hawkish toward North Korea. So Kim Jong-un needs to realize that this might be a more serious provocation even than launching ICBMs. On the other hand, if Russia and North Korea do begin cooperating militarily and even on the ballistic and satellite front, we can no longer call North Korea a rogue state. You know, that label goes out the window. And North Korea instead becomes part of this nascent authoritarian bloc. And that has security advantages as well as economic advantages, as Professor Chung was saying.
Interesting. So the international community's reaction might differ or depend on the extent of the weapon support North Korea gives to Russia. Now, Professor Chung, I'd like to tap on the missile launch as well. Just before the meeting, North Korea launched 2 short-range ballistic missiles into the East Sea, and experts say that this is highly unusual for Pyongyang to fire off missiles with Kim out of country. What do you think was the intention behind such a move?
Actually, this missile provocation by North Korea was very unusual given that, as you said, the leader Kim Jong-un is out of the North Korea. So you can interpret that in several ways. So first, it wanted to show North Korea's ability to exercise existing strike capability, even the absence of Kim Jong-un with North Korea. Or it can serve as a demonstration that they are fully prepared for actions such as nuclear warfare or missile attacks. Or it can be interpreted that it could be seen as a kind of protest against pressure from regional countries like South Korea and the United States, which are pressuring North Korea regarding its cooperation with Russia. As actually during the G20 meetings, South Korea sent a warning that cooperation with North Korea will be confront a significant cost to Russia. And the United States sent a similar message. So against those messages, North Korea wants to deliver a message of a resolve that North Korea intends to continue its cooperation with Russia as planned.
Right, I see. Now, before we move on to the military parade, I'd like to ask this question to our Professor Chung again. As Pyongyang continued to strengthen its ties with Beijing and, of course, Moscow, how does this affect tension on the peninsula, and what should South Korea's diplomatic direction be?
Well, many experts emphasize that this move of North Korea might kind of consolidating trilaterals between Russia, China, and North Korea on the one hand, and on the other hand, there is South Korea, United States, Japan triangles. So it seems like they are kind of bipolarizing toward the different positions. So it could bring a kind of Cold War. So, but I think we need to look at the current situation from a different angle. Russia requests support from North Korea instead of China, which must possess a higher level of weaponry and large quantity of ammunitions. That may be because China refused Russia's request. So it is possible that China didn't want to pursue military cooperations, including joint military exercise with North Korea, even though they maintain reasonably friendly relationship with Russia together. But at the same time, China shows that it's not willing to be fully aligned with Russia and North Korea. I think we need to continue to look at this point and continue the dialogue with China from this angle, such as trilateral between South Korea, Japan, China, as we are making progress for the summit.
Right, I see. Well, Professor Myers, since this question was the one that I really wanted to ask, Professor Myers, what's your view on this? I mean, should Yoon administration continue with its clear alignment with U.S. and Japan?
Well, I think it would be a shame if the Yoon administration allowed the close friendship and alliance with the United States to isolate South Korea completely from North Korea. You know, in the past, even at the height of the Cold War in like 1972, the two Koreas always maintained a certain autonomy from their respective allies, and they were talking to each other secretly or under the water, as the Koreans like to say. And I think that's a good thing. I think that helps to reduce tensions, certainly doesn't diffuse them, but I think it reduces them. So I would like to see President Yoon continue to at least pursue possibilities of dialogue with North Korea. I think that would be helpful.
Right, I see your point. Now, Professor Myers, let's move on to the military parade that took place last Saturday, marking the 75th anniversary of the regime. So the parade did not display ICBMs or other strategic weapons, just columns of motorcycles and tractors. First of all, could you give us the details of what the parade featured?
Yeah, there were motorcycles and tractors and trucks and all kinds of vehicles that we're not used to seeing in these parades. Of course, they weren't being displayed for their own sake, but as vehicles, as vehicles usually used for civilian purposes that can be used to military purposes in times of war, presumably defensive purposes, by North Korea's worker, peasant, Red Guards, as they're called. And they were, of course, out there in the parade in big numbers as well. And this is a sort of a paramilitary force, which is comparable, say, to the National Guard in the United States. And they're organized on a local level in the provinces and the towns, and they're trained to be mobilized at short notice and to fight with smaller arms. So we saw those smaller arms during the parade. You know, some of the weapons that we saw would have been, I think, of interest to the Russians, like the rocket tubes that were mounted on some of the trucks. And I think this parade was a clever propaganda move because it made good sense, you know, to honor a very large fighting force that doesn't really get a lot of the limelight in North Korea.
Right, I see. I mean, it was interesting to see motorcycles and tractors, but Professor Jung, why no strategic weapons? I mean, they could have displayed them, right? Was there any clear intention behind this?
Well, I think this is the demonstrations of North Korea's readiness to mobilize even civilian vehicles and adapt them for military use, such as converting them into mobile launchers. So I think even though it was not a kind of strategic kind of missiles, it underscores their preparedness for the full-scale deployment in case of contingency. So as we already seen from the kind of previous two military parades, we have seen those strategic missiles and launchers. And North Korea at this time tried to show that even civilians, they are kind of ready for the contingencies at every level, right down to individual citizen, the event of conflict. And also it can be kind of interpreted to fostering kind of internal cohesions in anticipation of the opening of its borders soon. So it's a kind of way to rally their population and ensure loyalty or solidarity in the face of uncertain external factors coming into their country.
I see. Now, Professor Myers, another interesting aspect of this military parade was Kim Jong-un's daughter, Kim Ju-ae. Kim Jong-un put his daughter right next to him during the parade, and sitting on the podium, or Army Chief Park Jong-chun taking a knee to whisper into her ear. Could we say such scenes indicate Ju-ae's elevated status?
Yeah, you know, it seems crazy to be talking about the growth in public stature of a little girl, but she does seem to have already become the #2 member of Kim Jong-un's entourage at big public events. And of course, this isn't just because he's proud of his daughter, as most fathers are, but because he's trying to habituate the North Korean public to the possibility of her taking over at some point. I'm not going to say the certainty of her taking over, because for all we know, there could be a son out there that we don't know about. But the government wants to leave no doubt in people's minds that the next succession is going to be a hereditary one, just like the last one. Now, people keep saying North Korea is kind of like a monarchy, but in fact, it is a monarchy. It just happens not to call its leader a king. And political scientists will tell you that monarchies are extremely stable forms of government. So I think the Kim regime wants to exploit that stability by removing all doubt that power is going to stay in the so-called Paekdu bloodline, as the dynasty is referred to in North Korea.
I see. So it could be, though it could be quite early to say that she would be the successor of Kim Jong-un, we could definitely see her elevated status. Professor Myers, I believe this would be our last question. A Chinese delegation led by Vice Premier Li Guozhong was present, while Russia did not send a separate delegation for this military parade. What could have been the reason behind this, perhaps to highlight the summit?
Yeah, you know, that all made good sense to me because, you know, the Russian defense minister was already there in late July in Pyongyang. And if you're Kim Jong-un and you're about to have a summit with the Russian leader, you don't need to be seen talking with high-level Russian officials in Pyongyang just a few days earlier. What are you going to talk about? So Russia sent a song and dance ensemble as a show of respect and goodwill and as a kind of hype for the upcoming summit. And I think that probably went down well. You know, North Koreans who are my age or older will remember the Kim Il-sung era when there was a constant stream of foreign musical acts, you know, from the East Bloc. There were other performers coming to North Korea. And I'm sure the audience in North Korea was very happy to see this international element kind of upgrading the parade.
I see. So there was a reason why Russia did not send a separate delegation. All right. Well, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Professor John and Professor Myers, for your time and insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. That's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching and goodbye.